Well, folks, we've now reached the final 10, and coming in at number 10 is none other than the wonderful Rowna Sutin, aka Cantor and Opera. My first experience with this particular opera reviewer dates back to when I was a 19-year-old studying in film school, and I first caught her review of Don Carlo by Verdi live from the Bayerische Staatsoper. Speaking as a fellow online music critic, I look up to her so much. And I've also followed a great deal of her videos for quite some time, and one can say that she has become quite the role model for me, especially when it comes to my field of music, most specifically opera, concerts, and even albums. And when you have someone like Rowna, who has a lot of experience, not only as a reviewer, but also as a cantor singer, a singer, and even a singing teacher, then the experience that she has really does show that she does know what she's talking about, and she really knows the ins and outs of what really makes a fine and good singer, which should be no surprise, as I stated before, the experience that she has in terms of being a singer and in terms of being a singing teacher is so much in evidence every time she reviews any opera installment, whether it be a Met in Live HD production or a live stream production or even an overall live performance. She manages to handle herself with class, dignity, and I just really love that warmth that she has on screen, which is something that I wish I could have. But more than anything, Rowna Sutin stands tall on my number 10 spot on my favorite reviewers list. And I also have to give a huge shout out to Mr. Opera, aka Stuart Sutton, Rowna's husband, for also being equally awesome. At number 9, we have Rowdy C from TV Trash and James B. Faraci, The Last of the Americans. Let's go to Rowdy C, known in real life as Chris Lee Moore. I first caught this reviewer ever since I was an 18-year-old senior high schooler, and I was totally invested in his show. Yes, those were my final 3 months of being a senior, but every time I watch his show, I just feel so entertained, and you could tell that this gentleman has a pure passion for television because he also grew up with it, that through that passion comes the research, the hard work, and the diligence that he has in order to really make his reviews be backed up by facts and not just come off as another caustic critic. And I just really find Rowdy C very enjoyable as a reviewer because, yes, he may play up the standard caustic critic type, but I managed to have a lot of fun with his reviews as he managed to not only be very entertaining, what with his talents also as a voice actor, providing the voices of his cat allies, and also being a very talented actor, not only for portraying Rowdy C, but also Wrestling Mark, P.O. Pizza Guy, and even his segment on News Crap. Chris really does show a great amount of talent, interest, and passion as a reviewer. Something that I admire so much about him, and something that I enjoy so much about Chris, especially when he does his reviews as Rowdy C from TV Trash. And then when we go to James B. Faraci from The Last of the Americans, his articles are just really well written in general, and I really love the collaborations that he has with different reviewers. One notable collaboration from James and Rowdy has to be their review of Disney's Sleeping Beauty, in which they called out some of the flaws from some of the protagonists, including Prince Philip, and they even stated that the fairies pretty much steal the show. The same thing can be said about Maleficent, and even to some extent, the Two Kings. And even though I do love Disney's Sleeping Beauty, I myself will admit that it does have some flaws. I might have to do a review of that someday. But for now, Chris, aka Rowdy C from TV Trash, and James B. Faraci from The Last of the Americans are two awesome reviewers that I also look up to so much because of their passion and because of the interest they have in whatever they have to review. Coming in at number 8 are Oancitizen from Brows Held High, The Cinema Snob, and Cinematic Excrement. Now let's go to Kyle Kalgren, aka Oancitizen from Brows Held High. I will admit that I have a soft spot for art films. I like how creative directors can be in terms of how they can really make an image speak. And even though some art films do tend to be overwrought and pretty much have their message spin on its wheels, one has to give credit to those type of media for at least doing something pretty imaginative. Enter Kyle Colgren, aka Oancitizen from Brows Held High. He is really enjoyable as a reviewer, mostly because you could definitely tell that the experience Kyle has when it comes to film, being someone who studied film himself, also is someone who is quite the connoisseur when it comes to being a filmmaker. He knows the ins and outs of what really makes a great film shine, and he also calls out some of the crap that art films do produce, like ambiguous messages, being pretentious, or even catering to the depraved. One really has to give it to Kyle, mostly because of how he was able to just have a lot of fun with this particular show, and the passion, the diligence, and the interest that he has for film really shine, mostly due to his experience not only as a filmmaker or an actor or someone who studied both film and acting, but for someone who really enjoys great films, and for someone who likes to tackle art films, and especially from someone who really knows the ins and outs and even which performances stand out and which performances don't. He is really enjoyable as a reviewer, and I find a lot of his material really fun to watch. Then we go to Brad Jones, the cinema snob, who oozes with sarcasm, oozes with deadpan snark, and he's just someone who's also really enjoyable. And when you put the talents of Kyle and Brad together in their collab reviews, most notably Tromeo and Juliet, you get a combination that is really fun. You have the down-to-earth yet straight man aspect of Kyle combined with the deadpan snarky nature of Brad's cinema snob, and they just mesh together wonderfully. Now, going to Brad as a standalone reviewer, he is strong enough on his own. He finds a lot of things to mock, but nonetheless, you could definitely tell that he has passion, charm, and just enough snark to make him really entertaining. And then when we go to the Smeghead from Cinematic Excrement, this is a gentleman who's not really a caustic critic, even though when it comes to reviewing bad films, one would have to be a caustic critic. But he's someone who manages to take the laid back and reasonable approach to finding out why certain films fail and what few nuggets of brilliance are there in those said installments. He's someone who is really enjoyable, and my first experience with the Smeghead from the Cinematic Excrement is his review of Never Back Down. Me personally, I find it to be a guilty pleasure, but to hear someone who also points out what's wrong with this film is not only quite interesting, but I deeply respect his opinion as to why he doesn't care about this particular film to begin with. So overall, Oancitizen, the Cinema Snob, and the Smeghead from Cinematic Excrement are really fine gentlemen who know the ins and outs of film, and one can sense their passion of filmmaking ooze from their videos. Coming in at number 7, we have Jaimetud, South Jersey Sam, Morgan from Vaulting, and of course, the one and only Mr. Coat. I was first introduced to these gentlemen by chance about 4 to 5 years ago when I was in Berlin searching for a flat. And when I saw these gentlemen, I was completely hooked. With Jaimetud, I really love his down-to-earth approach of how he reviews his installments, most notably his From Pages to Pictures reviews. He really has a good keen eye of what really makes the book stand out, what makes the movie stand out, what facets are there that are interesting and really strong and speak out to him. And one can sense the overall passion that he has, whether it be for film, for literature, or what have you. James is definitely a very down-to-earth person, and it really shows in his videos. And he's also someone who is also quite passionate and someone who is also just willing to do the research, thus making his reviews come out brilliantly. South Jersey Sam is also quite another great Mr. Coat contributor because he's just quite hilarious as a reviewer, and he also manages to do deadpan snark to the best of his abilities. He is definitely funny in his own special way, and I will never forget the epic thrashing that Sam did to Creepshow 3 in the now defunct fantasy movie Memories. Morgan from Vaulting is yet another enjoyable movie reviewer who not only takes a look at some of the blockbuster hits, but also takes a good look at some of the obscure cult films. And you could tell that Morgan is a very passionate reviewer, and he's someone who's also quite down to earth, and at times he can also experiment with certain things, like his top 10 most shocking TV broadcasts of all time, which has to be one of my most favorite videos from the one and only Morgan Ledger. And I could definitely see the sparks of brilliance that he has in his eyes and the passion that he has for film in general. Then we go to their boss, the one and only Mr. Coat, who was formerly known as That Fellow in the Coat, but whose real name is Stephen Ellison. Yes, much like my encounter with all of these aforementioned reviewers, Mr. Coat was another reviewer I caught completely by chance. And I find him not only to be down to earth, but I find him to be very informative and quite entertaining. But more than anything, he is very informative, and it also helps that in real life, Stefan is also a writer at The Scene magazine, in which he also contributes movie reviews to recent releases. Now that is awesome reviewing talent right there. But I have to give loads of kudos to Mr. Coat because he's just that awesome in his job as a reviewer. He does his research, and he has this really down-to-earth approach of how he sees certain installments, and he knows how to call out the crap with class and dignity, and he's just a very fine gentleman all throughout. So when it comes to Jaimetud, South Jersey Sam, Morgan from Vaulting, and of course Mr. Coat, these gentlemen manage to handle their reviews with class, intellect, and they just have fun with their installments. Coming in at number 6 are 3 reviewers who really played a major part in my life as an online reviewer myself. Ever since I first watched their videos as a high school student, well, more specifically, a senior in high school, I managed to get myself hooked with everything they had to offer. I'm of course referring to Hewy Toonmore, the cartoon hero, and the hardcore kid. There's no doubt that these 3 gentlemen have played such a huge role in my life as an online reviewer, and every time I see the passion they have for animated films, it just screams charisma and an overall brilliance that they have in their eyes, and they're just really great people to begin with. Now, in terms of Hewy Toonmore, I did catch him a little bit later than the cartoon hero and the hardcore kid combined. In fact, the first time I ever caught Hewy Toonmore, played awesomely by Logan Reidenbaugh, was through his cameo in the Fritz the Cat movie review done by the hardcore kid, aka Brandon Nichols. And his cameo struck a really strong impression on me that not only would I encounter him much later when he collaborated again with Brandon, aka the hardcore kid, when they did their movie review of Feliday, but I also got myself pretty hooked into what Hewy Toonmore had to offer. And that experience traced back to his review of The Swan Princess, which was a movie I did enjoy as a kid, but sadly enough, it didn't really hold up that much as an adult. But to see the passion, the charisma, and the overall charm and brilliance in his eyes is just really something I look up to so much. And it also helps that he is an artist himself. And I've seen a lot of Logan's drawings on DeviantArt, and they are quite awesome to look at. And I've also seen his appearances on the now defunct fantasy movie Memories, and Logan has a very down-to-earth air about him, which is something I really enjoy, and he's just a very great guy to begin with. So I'm not going to mince words here. Hewy Toonmore is definitely someone who has charisma, charm, and lovability in terms of the installments he takes a good look at. With the cartoon hero, I first knew Eli as Shinobi Flare before encountering him as the cartoon hero before I started my senior year in high school. And it's safe to say that whether he was Shinobi Flare or the hero of tomorrow, or even the cartoon hero himself, one can sense just how down-to-earth Eli really is and just how passionate he is about animation in general. And I've been following his career as a reviewer for quite some time, and he seems to get better and better as time went on. And I just enjoy him overall as a reviewer because, like I said before, I've been following his career as a reviewer for quite some time. And every time I watch the Cartoon Heroes reviews, it just seems that all my troubles relating to school and the world around me just melt away. And right there is a gentleman who has a lot of passion and a good amount of charisma, who really knows how to find out what pieces of animation really work and what pieces of animation don't work. And I get to see someone who's not only passionate, but also quite down to earth. With a hardcore kid, I did catch him 2 months before my Christmas break, back when I was a senior in high school. And the strongest first impressions that Brandon left on me were his reviews of Sisters from Teen Titans, Battletoads, and of course, Bartok the Magnificent. What I have right there is someone who is naturally hilarious, really charming, and he just has that type of charisma that makes him really unique. Based on his name, the Hardcore Kid, Brandon basically dresses up as a typical 90s kid who is into rock music, and he's just someone who is quite cool as a character. And he's just really enjoyable to watch on screen because he has that charisma, he has that energy, he has that brilliance that makes him so unique as a reviewer, and he's just fun overall. So when you have the very down-to-earth nature of Hewy Toonmore, who is also quite charming in his own special way, the very keen analytical sights of the cartoon hero, and the energy that the hardcore kid gives, then you have really fine gentlemen and really awesome dudes who really know the ins and outs of animation and are just charismatic in their own special way. So there's no doubt that the likes of Logan, Eli, and Brandon have found themselves on the number 6 spot on my list. Coming in at number 5 are Diamanda Hagan, the Nostalgia Chick, Obscurus Lupa, and MarzGurl. They are definitely really fun to watch, and they are really, really entertaining. In the installments, they take a good look at, and of course, they can be quite snarky from time to time. Diamanda Hagan, my word, she is just a riot to watch. Whether she is the heel of the many reviewers, most notably the cartoon hero or the hardcore kid, she's very entertaining. She mostly specializes in taking a look at a lot of the Z-grade films with emphasis on gore and at times horror elements. What really makes her stand out is her bombastic screen presence. She has a very strong and sturdy screen presence, and that voice of hers is just so awesome to listen to. Yes, I'm also a huge fan of her voice, which is so rough, yet at the same time really exciting to listen to, especially when she goes on her epic rants. And I also have to give loads of kudos to her minions, and of course, Alistair, the homeless bastard, and a lot of the other people who make cameos on her show. They're just really awesome, and when it comes to having someone like Diamanda Hagan, she's very entertaining, and she's just so much fun to watch on screen, helped with her bombastic screen presence, and of course, that signature round and gravelly voice, and of course, her towering height. She's really awesome in whatever she does, and she's just that fun to watch on screen. The nostalgia chick's deadpan snarker attitude is something that I look up to so much, mostly because she not only reviews certain media with a critical and keen eye, but at times she also does jab some jokes with certain installments, and she does so with some really dry humor. And I also love Lindsay's video essays explaining why Disney's Hercules was such a meh movie overall. And she does it in a very hilarious way, coming in with Funyuns and something to drink. She's just that hilarious. So when it comes to deadpan snarking, the nostalgia chick, aka Lindsay Ellis, is just really awesome at her craft. Obscurus Lupa was yet another reviewer who I also caught during my years as a senior high school student. And my first encounter of Obscurus Lupa was mostly through Eli's top 10 reviewers who should be on That Guy with the Glasses. And she was placed number 1 for a really good reason. She has an excellent screen presence, she's quite snarky, and she's quite down to earth when all is said and done. Allison really knows how to portray Obscurus Lupa with such hilarity, charm, and her screen presence is just simply put grand all throughout. But more than anything, her snark, her dry humor, and just who she is just make her very entertaining to watch. MarzGurl manages to combine being entertaining and very informative, and she's also quite enjoyable to watch. My first encounter with MarzGurl was her top 10 cartoon themes that explain the entire show, and I thought she was really entertaining. And I also love her Don Bluth movie reviews, which really shows that she not only has a passion for anime, but also for Western animation. Heck, she has a passion for animation in general, which is why I definitely enjoy her so much. So when you combine the bombastic nature of Diamanda Hagan to the more snarky nature of Obscurus Lupa and the nostalgia chick, and of course that enthusiastic yet very informative nature of MarzGurl, then these reviewers definitely have something very special in my heart. At number 4, we have Bennett the Sage, GRArkada, Professor Otaku, Animerica, and Otaku Nate's Lost Worlds of Anime. I put these 5 on the list because even though they do review some quite mainstream anime titles, they also dig into the more obscure titles. And in all fairness, they managed to really shed some light into a lot of these obscure titles and see which ones are the gems and which ones are really not worth anybody's time. With Bennett the Sage, he manages to balance irreverent comedy with him being quite informative, and with him knowing what goes on behind the scenes with these certain anime, and he does so in a way that adds a lot of charisma and quite charming in its own special way. I first knew Bennett the Sage through his many appearances on Yezu Otaku's reviews, mostly through his reviews of Aiken, Master of Martial Arts, and of course Sucker Punch and High School of the Dead. There, he serves as the main antagonist to Yezu Otaku, and I definitely found him a lot of fun to watch. And as a standalone reviewer, he's quite awesome in his own way, and he stands really tall on his own. And he also has that other character that he plays who is such a gigolo, and he's also really hilarious, especially when he appears on screen. Whether he reviews a lot of the crappy titles, mostly due to some of the dubbing or mostly due to some of their stories, he really knows how to be so charismatic, and he just seems to have a lot of fun really tearing into those obscure titles, especially the ones that really deserve a little bit of the bashing, mostly because of their writing or because of their overly convoluted messages. One has to give loads of credit to Bennett for being quite savvy, and even though we may not agree with his opinions on Akira or Grave of the Fireflies or even Perfect Blue, I have to give credit to Bennett in terms of how he managed to be himself and not take crap from anybody. He was able to stand on his opinions on his own 2 feet and he manages to really be his own person all throughout. GRArkada is quite systematic in his reviews, and he's nonetheless quite fun to watch, especially considering that he not only reviews early titles but also some of the more recent titles. I find his sense of analysis to be really well done, and I just enjoy his videos all throughout. Whether he analyzes the characters, the story, or even some of the issues going on in the anime, he manages to handle those said issues with tact, research, intellect, and a lot of understanding, while making sure that he stands on his opinions, balanced off with some logic and fact, which he managed to do really, really well, and I find him just awesome all throughout. With Professor Otaku, his snarky, dry tone is such a welcome pleasure for me. He manages to review certain titles, obscure they may be, or mainstream they may be, in such a manner that he looks at a lot of the elements, which is no wonder why his segments are called Anime Dissection, in which he takes a look at the characters, the stories, what makes them stand out, what makes them not stand out so much. And with his snarky, dry tone, he just reviews those set installments in a way that is quite a welcome treat for me. And I used to enjoy his videos ever since I was a 19-year-old in film school, and I felt like I was studying the anime that he reviews, and I was able to find out what makes certain facets of the anime work and what makes them kind of falter. And the ride with Professor Otaku was really enjoyable from beginning to end. With Animerica hosted by Will, he managed to have a storyline added into his review show, and he manages to do something pretty unique with that review show in that he watches entire episodes and gives a succinct summation on each of them before reaching his final conclusion. What makes Will so awesome is his charisma, his passion, and his manliness on screen, because he was just so natural in his performance that he was quite captivating, especially considering his opinions on certain anime like Elfen Lied, and he and his other co-reviewers even do a segment where they watch 2 episodes of an anime and see whether it's a pass and they'll watch it further, or not so much of a pass that they might end up just stopping, which I find really cool. And in terms of Otaku Nate's Lost Worlds of Anime, given this name, Otaku Nate basically specializes in a lot of the obscure and underrated anime titles, and sheds them some light. Whether he reviews certain anime that may not really be that desirable, like Dragon Out the Resonance, or rare gems like Fantastic Children, one can definitely tell that Otaku Nate has a huge passion for the world of anime. In fact, I used to also work with him as his scriptwriter for Dragon Out the Resonance, and even though I regretted watching that anime, I will definitely not regret the experiences that I had with him. Just working with Nate as one of his scriptwriters was quite the treat, and I definitely enjoyed the ride with him from beginning to end, and I really wished the best for his show. And the same thing I could say about all of their review shows, because I found them to be very informative, very entertaining, and just a lot of fun to watch, whether they have storylines, or whether they have snarks, or whether they have some class to back them up. There's no doubt that Bennett the Sage, GRArkada, Professor Otaku, Will from Animerica, and Otaku Nate's Lost Worlds of Anime managed to find themselves on the number 4 spot on my list. Coming in at number 3 are Douchebag Chocolat, Goat Jesus, Lewis from Anime Everyday, Bobsamurai, and Gigguk. These guys are mainly well known throughout YouTube, of course, for their anime reviews, and they're quite succinct when it comes to the animes they review, or even the opinions that they have on certain genres of anime, or even the music of anime, and even the overall artistic visions of what the anime creators have. With Douchebag Chocolat, Goat Jesus, and of course Lewis from Anime Everyday, these guys are quite awesome because they have an eloquent way of speaking and expressing their opinions on certain anime and certain anime directors, anime producers, and even in some occasions, voice actors and voice actresses. Much like the reviewers of number 4, they also shed some light to some really obscure titles and even some underrated titles, which I find really, really awesome, especially if someone like me wants a good anime fix and just wants to find out what other titles can I watch aside from the usual fare like Cowboy Bebop or Bleach or Dragon Ball Z. And when the likes of Goat Jesus and Lewis from Anime Everyday also talked about Technolize, I definitely have to agree with their viewpoints because, as I stated before in my top 15 favorite anime list from 2 years ago, Technolize is one of my most favorite anime series of all time because it was able to take me seriously as a person, and its dark, creepy atmosphere was something that I found so mesmerizing. With Bobsamurai, I really love his down-to-earth approach on reviewing anime, or even looking at some anime directors, or even music in anime. I really find his approach so awesome that I tune into his videos every time, and he's just so down to earth every time he's on screen. He's not overly enthusiastic, nor is he wooden. He's just right. And he backs everything up with facts, logic, and just an overall down-to-earth nature that really makes Bobsamurai so awesome. Gigguk is an absolute riot. I first tuned into his review show ever since I was about 18 and was a senior in high school. And it was basically on one Christmas break that I had with my mom and my sister that I caught his review of Oancitizen. And the biggest highlights in that review is that every time he sees a panty shot or something that screams fan service, he immediately says panty shot, and it just goes on, which makes it so hilarious to watch that I absolutely enjoyed his review of Oancitizen, and I found myself pretty much marathoning his reviews, which are really hilarious and has that wit to back him up so wonderfully. So what more can I say about Douchebag Chocolat, Goat Jesus, Lewis from Anime Everyday, Gigguk, and Bobsamurai? These guys are very eloquent and very unique on how they approach anime titles, whether they be obscure, underrated, good, bad, whatever they may be. They will definitely say the word if it's recommended or not. And they just manage to be very enjoyable in their own special ways. Coming in at number 2 are Linkara from Atop the Fourth Wall and the Spoony One from the Spoony Experiment. Yeah, you knew these guys were gonna end up on this list somehow, but they pretty much deserve to be. Their balance of snarky comedy with being informative and just being plain awesome is just enough to guarantee themselves the number 2 spot. Going to Linkara, I may have caught a few videos of him, mostly through a cameo he made with a hardcore kid, and even just a couple of videos of his comic reviews of a My Little Pony Christmas comic. But it's safe to say that Louis Lofhag manages to be so awesome as Linkara, and one can tell that he has loads of passion for comics and just really good storytelling. And it also helps that he is naturally hilarious and manages to bounce off being really snarky, but at the same time manages to be really, really humorous. His balance of humor, intellect, and snark is just so masterful and quite classy in its own way that one can tell that Linkara really enjoys his job as a comic reviewer, even though he has to face some really, really god-awful pieces of work, which is why his tagline is that he lets bad comics burn, which he does really, really well. With the Spoony One, aka Noah Antweiler, I caught this guy a lot more than Linkara, and it's safe to say that Noah manages to balance being snarky and humorous with being informative. And his reviews of the Tekken movies and a lot of the video game adaptations are just a lot of fun to watch. Whether they get the acid-tongued bashing through him, or just that diamond in the rough that he manages to find. He is a lot of fun to watch on screen, and sure, even though Noah may have gone through some really, really rough times in his life, I as a fan will be there for him, and I'll always find something really fun in terms of his works. And there's just a lot of things to really enjoy every time Noah is the Spoony One, whether he reviews bad video game movie adaptations or even some really good ones, or whether he makes a collab with certain reviewers. There's no doubt that the Spoony One is quite hilarious in his own special way, and he manages to balance off being snarky with being informative, and he just seems to have a ball as the Spoony One. So with that said, Linkara and Spoony are definitely not only wonderful reviewers, but also really awesome role models in my life as an online reviewer. But they're on the number 2 spot. Who's number 1, you ask? Well, what about the pioneers of online reviewing? And those honors have to go to none other than the Nostalgia Critic and the Angry Video Game Nerd. Now, you knew that these guys were going to be number 1 on my list of favorite reviewers, and there's a pretty good reason. I was at first quite oblivious to their names until I heard some reviewers talk about who the Nostalgia Critic and Angry Video Game Nerd were, and I tuned into their videos and I just have a major blast. The first Nostalgia Critic video that I ever saw was, I think, his look back on the Nicktoons and the Nickcoms. But I think my most memorable review from Doug Walker himself definitely has to be his review of The Good Son, which he managed to bash quite well, even though he had to use cue cards because he lost his voice. But one can tell that it was a very fun experience for me just seeing poor Nostalgia Critic just kind of suffer through this film with his lost voice. And there's no doubt that Doug Walker and James Rolfe have managed to really be the pioneers of online reviewing. And when you go to James Rolfe, in terms of his stint as the Angry Video Game Nerd, he's also one of the firsts in terms of how he managed to really turn the simple concept of putting videos on video sharing sites and turn it into something that is really innovative and really entertaining. And that's what he did as the Angry Video Game Nerd. My biggest highlight from James Rolfe as the Angry Video Game Nerd is definitely his review of the video game Home Alone 2 Lost in New York. That video game was so freaking horrendous that I'm actually glad that I never played it. So what more can you say about the Nostalgia Critic and the Angry Video Game Nerd? They were definitely the pioneers of online reviewing, and they deserve the number 1 spot of my favorite reviewers of all time because of the legacy they've left and just how awesome they are as reviewers. And even though some of their content may not be as great as their former years, mostly with the Nostalgia Critic's case, they're still able to go really, really strong, and one can sense the passion, the love, and just how fun they really are, not only as reviewers, but also as people. It's no doubt that these gentlemen have placed themselves on the number 1 spot because of just how great they are as reviewers, and they're basically a decorum of just how aspiring reviewers really want to be, whether they want to emulate their styles or not emulate their styles. One has to give the Nostalgia Critic and the Angry Video Game Nerd loads of credit for just being plain great at what they do. Well, that's it for my top 30 favorite reviewers of all time list, and this is also my final contribution to the Red Ribbon Reviewers, and of course my final video of me being here in Stockholm. It was also a pretty cool time that I had here, especially with all the operas that I went to and the ballets, and of course the concert that I went to. And for those of you who enjoyed this list, what did you guys think of it? Was there a reviewer that stood out to you the most? Did you feel like I missed out certain reviewers? Was there a reviewer that you really, really love that was not on this list? Did you feel like there was a reviewer that could have been a lot higher on this list? Comment below and let me know. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in on January 6th, where I review a New Year's concert starring some Japanese singers when I'm back in Berlin. So until then, good night, everybody, and Happy New Year!